Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Do you believe in Bigfoot? Not sure what I think myself. I hate feet, so I really don't even want to think about it. When a customer walks in with flip-flops, I activate the toe-biting bugs. They swarm across the floor looking for sockless victims. Show some respect to baristas, people. Hey, speaking of big freaking feet, today's stories feature a possible European Bigfoot or two, a murderous Pizza Hut nemesis, and a man in the woods who has his throat sliced right open. Yep, it's a violent set of stories today. So join me as I share with you these tales from the break room. Also, send me your scary work stories at eriecast.com/submit so I can narrate them. Footsteps in the Snow. From Miriam. First of all, I would like to preface that English is not my first language, so bear with me if there are small mistakes here and there. My name is Miriam, and I have spent nearly all my adulthood working in hospitality. I was born in Austria, in an alpine village not too far from Innsbruck, the ski capital of our region, so I naturally spent many winters working at ski resorts in the area. The story I'm about to tell you goes back many years ago. I was fresh out of high school, so I was still fairly young and naive. I was saving up money for a road trip in Australia, the country of my dreams, in which I would eventually settle as an adult. Quite ironically, I always hated snow and cold weather. I had just found a waitressing job at a ski resort. I decided to work as a waitress primarily to improve my English skills, as we had many international tourists in the area. Me and the other guys in the kitchen were having a lot of fun, as the kitchen managers were not controlling at all, and they gave us a lot of freedom. I fondly remember that first experience far from home, and all the friends I'd made there. It was hard work, of course, running from table to table, switching between German and English on the spot. But I also had many dead hours during the day, while guests were gone skiing, and I usually spent that time sleeping or reading a book, since I myself was not interested in skiing at all. It wasn't unusual for some of the kitchen and waiting staff to gather together after dinner service. We were young folk far from home. Many of us actually came from Italy and Germany, so we became a close-knit group. We would hang around in the common room of the staff residence and drink beer, play board games, and chat about life. It was the only fun thing to do around there, as the resort sat at the mountain's base, far from the main town and with no connection to it during the night. It was also a time when smartphones still did not exist. Simpler times, perhaps, where human interaction was much more valued. Or at least, this is my opinion. We would entertain each other by telling scary stories and ghostly tales about the nearby forest, which had quite a bad reputation. An older colleague, a lady that had cleaned rooms in the same resort for more than 10 years, had once told me it was not uncommon for backcountry skiers to get lost in it, get injured, and die before any rescuer could find them, if they were ever found. The tricky thing was that there are many dead ends inside the forest, clearings that look like a track, but instead lead to a denser forested area, which forces any skier to proceed walking. And the ground is rocky and irregular, two characteristics that can easily be hidden by snow, providing optimal traps for inexperienced tourists. At the end of one of those nights, after maybe drinking a bit too much, I remained alone in the common room. It was around midnight, I think, and everyone else had already gone to bed. I wasn't really feeling tired, despite being a bit tipsy, maybe because I'd spent the whole afternoon sleeping. I picked up the empty glass bottles and realized that the bin we placed empty glass in was full. So I sighed, put on my winter coat, and resigned myself to walk outside in the cold to reach the recycling bins. It was a chilly night, as we were in the middle of the winter season. I could see the stars with incredible definition, as out there was very little light pollution. My moon boots were sinking into the fresh snow. The recycling bins were located some 100 meters behind the residence, on the side of a road that coasts the forests I mentioned earlier. The forest was pitch black, and the shadows of the mountain peaks towered behind it. Everything was quiet, but I couldn't shake away a weird feeling that kept me on guard. I don't know exactly what I was afraid of. I was young, and being a girl, I always felt a bit uneasy being alone outside at night. I threw each bottle in the bin with a loud crash. Then I rushed back inside. I won't lie, I let out a relieved sigh when I closed the back door behind me. I was standing in the foyer, where we usually leave skis and shoes, when I heard someone knocking at the door. The blood in my veins froze, and I held my breath. My first reaction was to pretend I hadn't heard it, but after half a minute, they knocked again, and so I answered. "Who's there?"
"Hello? Could you let me in? It's freezing outside,"
replied a male voice in a low, tired tone. I looked inside the peephole, and I saw a young man. The first thing I noticed about him was that his clothes were pitifully inadequate for the season. He wore only a brown leather jacket and some blue jeans. I could see him shivering because of the cold, and he had a hard time keeping his eyes open. My first thought was he might be one of the guests at the resort that got lost. As I said, we were in the middle of nowhere. There were only a handful of buildings in a 10-kilometer radius, and all the people in the area were either tourists or seasonal workers. Plus, it looked like he was about to freeze to death. I know it sounds incredibly naive, but I did open the door to let him in. The man staggered inside, and I saw that he was barefoot. That felt extremely weird to me. How long had he walked before reaching the residence? His feet were white and blue, probably on the verge of freezing. I felt terrible for him, wondering if he would have to have his feet amputated. I had him sit in the common room, where he curled up against the radiator. I hurriedly brought him something hot to drink. My hands were shaking. "Stay here. I'll call an ambulance," I said.
No, I have to go back."
"You can't go anywhere with your feet like that." He looked at me straight in the eyes, and with utter seriousness he replied, "It follows. It will find me, and I have to go." At that point, I was completely sure this guy was crazy. Maybe he had hallucinations. I've read something about the effects of cold and exhaustion on the human mind while I was in school. This is what happened to Scott's expedition in Antarctica. They started to hallucinate about someone else following them. I felt very uncomfortable. I didn't want to be alone with him, and I started to regret letting him in before calling for help. "Stay here. I'll call for help," I said again, trying to not let my fear transpire. I walked slowly out of the common room, without losing eye contact with him. And then I literally ran up the stairs and to the only landline phone in the entire residence. First, I called for an ambulance, and then I dialed the police. Then I banged on the door of one of my colleagues, explaining to him what happened, and we both went downstairs. This colleague of mine was an older guy, always very calm and in control of the situation. I felt more safe knowing that he was by my side. But when we entered the common room, we found it empty. I ran to the back door where, as sure as daylight, I found barefoot footsteps in the snow. They went back and forth to the forest on the other side of the road. Emergency personnel arrived in an hour or so, and they searched the area, but found nothing. The footsteps in the forest led to a rocky patch where it was very hard to trace them further. they decided to try again with the aid of daylight. But the next day, a blizzard came early in the morning, destroying every possible trace and making the rescue dangerous too. The resort managers checked the lists of the guests, and apparently no one had gone missing. So, did the mysterious guest really come from the forest? I didn't sleep that night, and I had troubled dreams for a long while after that. I talked to my colleagues, and they all tried to console me, saying that I couldn't have done anything more than what I already did, that he walked out on his own free will. But I can't help but feel guilty. I ruminate on the fact I should have locked the door of the common room, or that I should have called someone else before opening the back door. To this day, I still ask myself who that man was, and what really happened to him. From what I know, the police never managed to connect my strange encounter with any missing person cases. So, where did he come from? And where did he go off to? And more importantly, was he crazy? Or was there really something following him? The Village. From Thematt. In my home state, there is a tiny little historical village right in the middle of the densely populated city. At the time, I worked for a city police agency, and this village, while now being a retail shopping spot, was owned by the state, and therefore was needing actual police patrols rather than hired security. It was a sought-after overtime shift because it was usually so chill. Working there is a fun and laid-back shift. Coincidentally, I happen to love this village, having been there on field trips as a kid, and many dates as a teenager. I even took my wife there on a date when we were only dating. It's a beautiful little spot, great for family activities. This is where my story begins. This little village is gorgeous and approximately 20 acres. It contains its own river and barns. It's always tastefully decorated for the seasons, especially fall. The tiny historical homes have been updated, while still keeping the old world charm, and are leased to shop owners to sell trinkets, boutiques, candy, toys, books, you name it. It even has its very own taffy-making shop, full of modern and old-time candy. A massive barn was converted to an overpriced multi-level furniture store. An old grain silo was converted to a fancy restaurant, complete with romantic outside dining. Additionally, there are horse stables and many open fields where the pioneers grew their crops. All the little homes, shops were arranged on either side of the little river, with cool wooden bridges and winding stone paths, and boardwalks connecting you to shops. It's like a little piece of New England. My shift started at 9 p.m. when the shops closed down for the night. It's my job to ensure all the workers, mostly teenagers or early 20-something adults, get to their cars safely and make sure the historical artifacts go untampered with all night, and certainly no shops get broken into. It was October, so it was a chilly night. I opted to wear a winter coat that had my police agency insignia on it, and my badge was visible. I began my patrol around the shops, enjoying the Halloween decor. Most of the village was lit with string lights over the stone paths, jack-o'-lanterns still glowing through shop windows. After making sure all the workers made it out safely, I began my rounds first by making sure they all locked up their shop doors. Pretty often you find them unlocked, and you have to enter the shop to lock the doors. As I walked my usual route, I found a shop unlocked. This shop was called The Antiquity. It was a larger pioneer home that sold antique items. These kids never remember to lock the doors of this place, I was thinking. I went ahead and locked it myself, and carried on with my business. As I walked, I also checked the river to make sure no one was camping out under the small bridges or worse. After my first round of the evening, It was only about 10 p.m. At the edge of the property, there is a small shed that we're supposed to hang out in. It has CCTV cameras of most of the property. It's also where the farm equipment, ATVs, and snowblowers are stored. It's a spooky little building with no amenities, lacking heat as well, aside from a small little electric heater that barely worked. I was working on a master's degree, so I brought my laptop. I decided I would do some homework in between rounds, since nothing ever seems to happen on these shifts anyway. I made several more rounds that night, enjoying the crisp fall air and crunching of fallen leaves as I walked. As my shift was coming to a close, the shop workers returned to their shops for their day of work. I decided I would talk to the antiquities shop workers and remind them to actually lock up their door tonight. "I swear I locked it," the teenage girl told me. "The lock must be broken. It's always unlocking on its own." Sure, I thought. Likely story. I went home and went to bed. A few days later, I was able to snag another overtime shift working at the village. This shift was the same week as Halloween, and the village was open later than usual because they were running a haunted corn maze and had converted one of the larger shops into a haunted house. It was a lot of fun, and they also have a witch hunt activity for the kids. They hide witches all over the village to be found like a scavenger hunt. This meant I had my work cut out for me, as we would be open late. It may be harder to get everyone out of the village on time, and also make sure the workers get to their cars safely. The air was colder as we were deep into October, and there was even more decor around for the festivities. Caramel apples and hot chocolate were for sale at virtually every shop, and everyone dressed up in their Halloween costumes. It's truly a fun little town, most of the time. When the haunted house and corn maze are running, I usually have to be close by because people tend to get lost, or people tend to do other nefarious things in the maze. On this particular evening, the shops were finally closing, and things were quieting down. Like usual, I take the employees to their cars and get on my security checks of the shops. I made my way around the village, and once again, I found the antiquities shop unlocked. I decided to go inside this time. I haven't spent much time in that particular shop, and their decor was pretty cool. I left the door open behind me as I went in, since I'm supposed to be the only person in the village anyway. I browsed the little house shop, looking at the decor. Their motion-activated Halloween decorations were going off as I walked by, occasionally startling me. I noticed there was a small wooden stairwell leading up some stairs. I had no idea the store actually had 2 floors. I thought the top window was just for show. I decided to walk up the stairs. They squeaked with each step I took. The only thing upstairs was a small bedroom, still set up with the antique furniture. On the wall was a family photo, an ancient photo of a family with a farm in the background. It must have been whoever owned the home, and the farm must have been what the village used to be. As I was looking at the photo, the front door, which I'd left opened, suddenly slammed shut. I was startled. I quickly went down the stairs, expecting to find someone in the shop with me. But there was no one. I realized I needed to continue my rounds, so I locked the door and continued my job. I walked through the cobblestone paths, admiring the decorations and checking all the doors with no other events. At this point, it's about 2 a.m. I had the urge to go back to that antiquities shop and visit the bedroom again. I didn't get to look around at everything before I jumped at what I thought was the wind shutting the door. So as I approached the shop again, I noticed a dim light on upstairs through the window. Maybe I left a light on in there. I pulled out my keys to unlock the door, but I found the door to be unlocked again. At this point, my suspicion was telling me it must be occupied by a squatter, someone enjoying the bed. I pulled my gun and entered the shop, anticipating an arrest. As such, I also got on my radio to notify dispatch and have them roll some backup over, something I've never had to do on this shift. As my footsteps creaked up the stairs, I found a small lantern lit, its flame flickering on the wicks. I had earlier assumed the lantern didn't actually work, so I would remember lighting it myself if I had. I quickly entered the bedroom and found nothing else disturbed. I holstered my gun and notified dispatch that I had no contact with any trespasser. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Fight or flight kicked in. How could it be the door unlocked, the lantern had been lit, but no one had been found? I continued my investigation, attempting to find any sort of disturbance. Suddenly, someone blew out the lantern, leaving me in the darkness with only my flashlight for light. I considered running out of the room, back down the stairs, but that would mean running past the lantern that had just been blown out, and that didn't feel like a good idea. Just then, I heard the now familiar sound of footsteps creaking up the old rickety stairs. I shone my flashlight at the doorway, and I had my gun ready. Everything about this screamed ambush. Sure enough, as the footsteps reached the landing at the top of the stairs, there was no one to be seen. I ran out of that building as quickly as I could carry myself and ran to the little security shack, spending the rest of the shift there. I tried to convince myself I wasn't insane. I finished my shift, still terrified. I decided I would ask the kids in the morning about their experiences there. "Oh yeah, this place is hella haunted," the young girl said. Young folks always had a way with words. "Rumor has it one of the old farmers from this village still lives here, probably because we kept all of his antiques as a shop." I continued my shifts there, but I didn't bother going into that shop anymore. Absolutely no point in scaring myself. I just enjoyed the village from the outside of the little shops. River Cult. From Theo. I've worked as a Department of Natural Resources officer in Western Maryland for a little over 20 years now. I spend virtually my entire work week outside, and in doing so, I have experienced a lot of odd things. Now, my teenage son told me I should write to you about some of the things I've seen, so let me know if you like this one. This story took place in 2003, about a year or two after I first became a DNR officer. The region I patrol most often is the upper basin of the Potomac River and some of the surrounding state parks. On this particular day, I was out solo in a boat on the Potomac near Fort Frederick State Park. I won't get any more specific regarding locations for the sake of privacy, but this was an area I was extremely familiar with because I had grown up maybe 30 to 40 minutes away from there. This is a stretch of the river that gets a fair bit of recreational traffic, so most of the time I'm just making sure people have their fishing licenses and the captains of boats aren't too drunk. I remember it being a fairly uneventful day on the river, and I was starting to head back right as the sun began to set. On my ride back, I saw a small smokestack arising from the forest on the Maryland side of the river. Now, this area of the forest was still a part of the state park, so I knew that no personal fires were allowed outside of the designated camping area. So I decided to go check it out, real quick, before I headed back to the boat ramp. As I approached the bank of the river and slowed my engine down, I heard faint chanting sounds. I couldn't quite identify what was being said, but it was definitely a little eerie. I stopped the boat and tied off to a nearby sycamore tree, then decided to venture up the bank line into the forest. At this point, the sun was almost completely set, and it was nearing pitch black. I wasn't expecting to be out this late, so unfortunately for me, all I had was my handheld flashlight on me. As I began to trek further into the forest, the chanting continued and got louder. I could now hear chanting clearly, but I was still unable to decipher what was being said. I was sure, though, that it was certainly not English. It almost sounded like some type of Latin or ancient Greek. I get more and more on edge as I slowly continued my approach. I got about 300 or 400 yards away from the fire and decided to take cover behind some black walnut trees to scope out the situation. I turned off the flashlight, and what I saw will forever be engraved into my memory, no matter how hard I try to forget it. There was about 10 cloaked individuals in all black, circled around this fire. They were continuing to chant, the same chant I'd heard earlier, and my one high school Latin class confirmed to me that they were speaking in Latin. I had no idea what they were saying exactly, but I saw these odd, idol-like wooden figures surrounding the fire. I was too far away to differentiate what exactly they were, but it seemed like for every person by the fire, there was one of these weird wooden sculptures behind them. I sat there and watched for about 5 or so minutes when I saw a person come out of the dark and approach the fire. This particular person was wearing an all-red cloak, and I could not see their face, but I could see what they were dragging. A man, seemingly beaten to a pulp but still breathing. The man was bleeding quite a bit and had weird symbols carved all over his back. The red-cloaked figure dropped him on the edge of the fire, and the chanting stopped immediately. At this point, my heart was racing, and I was almost entranced by what was happening in front of me. The person in the red cloak pulled down his hood, and I could now see his face. He was a clean-shaven man who looked seemingly normal, except for his cheeks. They were scarred with some of these same symbols that were on the man that had been dragged. The red-cloaked man began to speak in Latin again, and I finally snapped back into reality. I quickly realized no one knew I was out here, and my only form of self-defense was the 6-shot revolver holstered on my hip. I knew I had to call in for backup from the sheriff's department before I could really do anything. As I was about to reach for my walkie, I saw the red-cloaked man unsheath a dagger and quickly slice the man's throat. I had to cover my mouth to stifle a scream, lest I end up like that man. The cloaked man then put a small cup underneath the bleeding slit, collecting his blood. I quickly got my walkie-talkie and in a whisper, I radioed the local sheriff's office, telling him my approximate location and that I had just witnessed a murder. The sheriff himself told me he was dispatching all of his available units to my location and to stay hidden until they got to me. I got back to my original position, and I saw the dark hooded figures come up to the deceased man one by one. They each grabbed his bleeding neck and dragged it across their respective wooden idols. This goes on for about 15 minutes, all while the red-cloaked man spoke in Latin. As I go down to grab my walkie to ask how far out my backup was, I made a fatal mistake. I pressed down on my flashlight, and it turned on for just a brief moment. Plenty of time to give away my position. My heart sank. I peeked around the walnut trees I was hiding behind to see if they saw me, and I saw the red-cloaked man staring right at my hiding spot. He had stopped chanting, and the forest had gone silent. I then saw all the black-cloaked figures fan off into the woods one by one towards my position. My fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. I ran as fast as I possibly could. I started a full sprint back towards the river in the dark, so I didn't make my escape obvious. As I ran through the woods, I saw torches lit up behind me in pursuit. I then finally saw the moon glimmer reflecting off the surface of the river, and I sprinted to the bank. As I made it to the bank, I heard the Latin chanting begin again, and I jumped in the boat. I cut the line I tied to the sycamore tree and started the engine. Then I floored it towards the boat ramp upstream. But I did look behind me at a point, and I saw the light of the torches on the bank all in a straight line. Unfortunately, I don't really know what happened after that. I went to the sheriff's department as soon as I could, gave my testimony, told them everything I saw. After giving my statement, I talked to the sheriff, and he said the on-scene deputies saw no wooden idols, no sculptures, no people, and they found no dead man. All they found were embers of a fire and traces of blood. That was the last information I received regarding the investigation, and I think for my own mental health that that's for the best. Now I don't know what I saw or who I saw, but I thank the Lord each and every day that I was able to escape. Some kind of Bigfoot in Southern Europe. From SmallWinery. I always said that life has a funny way of kicking you when you're down, and that couldn't be more true last year, when in the same week I lost both my place to stay and my job in the factory due to sudden layoffs because of some scandal that made the company lose face and investors. Needless to say, I was pretty down on my luck. Had to move from the city for the first time in almost 6 years to stay with my parents at their place in a small village about 25 kilometers away. It would be temporary, just until I could find a job and get back on my feet. But the suddenness of it all hit me like a truck. Thankfully, one of my friends from high school, who I still occasionally talk to, Matt, offered me a job. The guy was saving my butt all throughout our 4 years together in that sorry excuse of a school, constantly letting me copy his spreadsheets and homework, and now he was saving me again. Of course, I accepted right away. I would be working on his family's farm, which was about 8 kilometers away from my parents' house, where I was staying. Since Matt was too busy doing college stuff, and his dad required help on the farm, they decided to hire me instead of looking for some rando who they probably couldn't trust. After talking it over with Matt and his dad, we sealed the deal, and I would begin working next week, Monday morning at dawn. Monday came sooner than expected, and I begrudgingly got out of bed, beginning my drive to the farm when it was still dark outside. After 10 minutes or so, I arrived at the house/farm. It was a big house with an even bigger backyard, and behind it was a small fence that led to the fields and the farm. Since they lived on the outskirts of their village, next to them was an unbelievably large forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. As I would later learn, the giant overgrown forest was starting to cause problems on the farm, but since it was government property, nothing could really be done about it. And the people responsible for those kinds of disputes, as usual, didn't like doing their jobs and never sent anyone out to check out their complaints. I got there at about 5:10 a.m., still sleepy. Even though it was almost summer, the mornings were still cold. I got out of my car and was immediately greeted by Matt's dad, Mr. Wilton. He was a burly man in his 50s by then, with a big gray mustache and a beer belly. His face was weathered and rough like you'd expect from someone who spent their entire life on a farm. After greeting me, he wasted no time in putting me to work. After a little chat, he handed me a pair of sturdy work gloves and a list of tasks for the day. The work was divided into several categories: livestock care, crop maintenance here and there, general farm upkeep, and problem-solving any immediate issues that arose. The day started with feeding the animals. The farm had cows, pigs, chickens, and a couple of horses. Each animal had specific dietary needs, and I had to ensure they all had water and food. This involved carrying heavy bags of feed and filling water troughs, which was a hellish workout first thing in the morning, something my city-oriented lifestyle hated very much those first few weeks. After feeding the animals, I had to clean out the stables and pens. This was a dirty job, shoveling manure, replacing bedding straw, and making sure the living areas were hygienic to prevent diseases. It was honestly a miracle how I didn't puke while doing it, with the smell invading your nostrils, whether you wanted it to or not. Of course, Mr. Wilton was there by my side for the first week. He was both teaching me things I didn't know and keeping an eye on me, in case I did do something stupid. Despite how he looked, he was a sweet old guy, constantly cracking jokes and not giving much of a crap for not knowing some things. One of the things he taught me was how to milk a cow by hand, which I had to do twice a day. He spent most of his day on the farm, driving all kinds of tractors and machines around. So I was mostly on the farm, really only coming with him if he needed some help. Still, farm work was more than enough for me, having to also keep the barn and all the equipment clean and tidy, and the overgrown forest bordering the farm was a constant issue. Occasionally, trees or branches would fall and they would have to be cleared away. The first week I was there felt like torture, feeling like every muscle in my body turned to jelly when I got home. But over time, I got better, growing accustomed to the farm life. I also liked the feeling of satisfaction I got when I did something with my own two hands. You can't get that living in the city most often, working on a computer 8 hours a day. In the evenings, Matt and I would regularly sit on the couch, drinking gemischt, while reminiscing about our high school days. However, things wouldn't stay all fine and dandy forever. I worked there for about 3 months, and that's when stuff began to go sour. One evening, as I was walking down the farm, finishing my rounds, I started to hear noises from the forest. Now, typically, that was nothing new, since the forest was brimming with all kinds of wildlife all throughout the day. But this was different. It sounded strange, unlike anything I'd ever heard. Whatever it was, it sounded big too, like a mix of deep guttural growl and monkey noises. I stopped moving, trying to listen more closely, trying to figure out what was making that noise. It was almost rhythmic too, and after a few more growls, it finally stopped. I was confused and slightly curious, but I ignored it and went on my way. The next day, I told Matt about the noises, expecting him to laugh at me or give excuses for it, to tell me it was some animal I wasn't familiar with. Instead, his face went serious. "You heard it too?" he asked, his voice low. "Too?" I asked, surprised. Matt nodded, looking over at the woods. "Yeah, my dad and I have been hearing those noises for a couple of weeks now, always at night. We thought it was just some animal. But now, well, I don't know. Dad says other farmers in the area reported some strange noises as well, but nothing to be concerned about. That is until yesterday. Not long after you left for the day, my dad got a call from one of his friends. This one lives a couple of kilometers away. He's apparently been hearing some things as well. He says that yesterday something even attacked his livestock, took 2 of his goats, and killed one." Matt's face was serious. I looked at him, flabbergasted. I wasn't sure what to reply with. "We don't have bears here, so maybe it was a wolf. Maybe the attack and the noises were connected," he answered. "Don't know. Dad said he hasn't seen wolves here for a better part of a decade. But I do know one thing. Everyone who's complaining about the sounds lives near the forest." I then watched him warily glare at the forest. That night, I heard it again. The same growl monkey screech that I'd heard before. The only difference this time was how much more freaked out I was since I had talked to Matt. I chose to keep a safe distance from the wooden fence that separated the property from that overgrown forest, but that didn't do much to calm my nerves. The next day, I came back to see Mr. Wilton and Matt talking in front of the house, visibly annoyed about something. As I approached them, both looked at me with a concerned look. Mr. Wilton then invited me in. He set me down and gave me a shot of vodka before asking, "Do you know how to carry a rifle?" I looked at him, shocked at that sudden question. I stumbled over a few words before he continued. "Last night, Les' farm got attacked. He says he was about to go to sleep when he heard strange noises coming from the forest." Mr. Wilton stopped to refill his glass and then continued. "Says he couldn't see much from his window, but he did see two glowing yellow eyes emerge from the forest, break down the fence and go straight for his pig pen. Whatever it was, must have been the size of a bear if it could do that to his fence." Mr. Wilton said I couldn't tell if he was irritated or a bit scared. From what I understand, he and Les were longtime friends, and Les was the last farm in the village before a bunch of forest and unclaimed, uninhabited land. "I don't know how to handle a gun, sorry, but why do you ask?" I said after a long pause. "If it hit Les, we're right next door, and I ain't letting it take my livestock, you hear me? If you can't handle a gun, Matt will go with you," he said, stern. "Go where? What, you want us to go hunt the dang thing?" Matt said. "No, you two are idiots. I pray to God every time you take the tractor out in the fields. If I can't trust you with a piece of junk like that, I ain't gonna send you to hunt. You'll walk around with John and be his backup. If you two hear or see anything, run into the house as fast as you can. The rifle's for a worst-case scenario," his dad answered. From the way he was talking and acting, we both knew he was dead serious. Matt and I looked at each other, not saying a word. That night, we were both out on the farm, walking around like I was doing before. I could tell both of us were nervous as heck, not really talking, just listening to any noises coming from the woods. We made about 2 laps around before we heard a loud shriek, louder than the ones before. Matt immediately pointed the old rifle upwards, towards the overgrown forest, looking aimlessly into the darkness. I looked at him, and as my head was turned towards him, I saw his expression change into fear. Then the rifle went off. As I covered my ears, I glanced up to see him beckoning me to run into the house. Shortly after we got back inside, his dad came from the other side of the house, watching on the back porch that looked to the fields. What happened?" he said in a loud voice as he stomped through the kitchen where we were. "I saw it. It was huge, like 2 meters tall, just staring at us," Matt said. I don't think I'd ever heard him so scared. His dad looked at me before making sure all the windows and doors were locked. Needless to say, I spent the night there in the old and dusty guest bedroom. When I woke up, I was greeted with the stench of booze and cigarettes coming from the living room. As I got up, I saw a group of mostly old men with a few younger folks hanging around the dinner table. I pulled Matt aside and asked him what was up. "Dad says it's getting bolder. Thankfully, the animals are fine, at least for now. But if it got that close to the farm, where we could see it, then he thinks it'll attack soon." Dad and Les gathered their old hunting buddies, most of which live around or next to the woods. They want to kill the thing once and for all, wait for it to try to attack our animals, then spray it with bullets. I wasn't sure what to say to that. The plan and the whole situation seemed insane to me. Then again, there definitely was something wrong with those woods, and whatever lived in there. Look, I didn't want to lose my job, and I didn't want to get killed. After a while, I sat at the table with them and listened. After a while, a plan was formed. There'd be people in groups of 3 patrolling the farm, looking out for the thing, and if anyone saw it, we would gather up and shoot it dead. The night came and soon everyone arrived. almost all of them carrying old hunting rifles, or guns they managed to keep after the war in '91. I found myself on the edge of the woods again, this time with Matt by my side, along with one older gentleman. We sat in the dark, listening to the usual nighttime sounds, but always on edge, waiting for something out of the ordinary. Hours passed, and just as I was starting to think the night would be uneventful, the growls returned, this time closer than before. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Matt. He nodded, gripping his flashlight tight. "Stay close." We moved cautiously towards the sound, pointing our flashlights around slowly. The growling began to become quieter and quieter until it stopped. Then, as we were about to turn back, we laid eyes on something, a hulking shape with these reflective yellow eyes. It was huge, towering over both me and the older guy that was with us. I pointed my flashlight at it, so I got a pretty good look at the thing. It looked like a giant man, covered in deep black fur, with an elongated face that barely resembled a human. Frozen in fear, we watched it just observe us, and then a second creature came out of the nearby brush into the spotlight. They began to move together, eyes fixed on us. Panic surged through me, but Matt held his ground. "We need to get back," he said, his voice steady, despite the terror I saw on his face. We slowly backed away, keeping our lights trained on the things. But they followed us, their movements creepily coordinated. When we reached the light coming from the open barn, Matt raised his rifle and fired directly into one of the creatures. Instantly, I began to shout for the others to come. The creatures halted, hitting us with this ear-piercing screech of pure rage as they retreated into the shadows. We stood there petrified, and before long, the others began to group around us, asking what happened. Some of them wanted to chase after them and hunt them down, but ultimately, we didn't do anything after that. The next day, Mr. Wilton told me I didn't have to come to the farm anymore, and honestly, I was happy to do just that. I don't know much after that night. The only thing I do know is that the following day, he and a few others set up bear traps around the edges of the forest in a desperate attempt to protect themselves from whatever was out there. I heard from Matt about a week later that, after the incident, there were no more attacks or reports of shrieks coming from the forest. But everyone knew they were still out there. I don't know what those things were, but I know one thing for sure. Nobody who was there that night is going to set foot alone in that forest again. Worst Pizza Hut experience. From Arrow. This story is the worst incident I ever had while working as a shift manager at a Pizza Hut. I was 21 years old at the time in 2020, so not too long ago. Some info on the man that caused this whole thing, who I've known since I was a little kid. I'd always thought there was something off about the guy. He was always in trouble, always doing something to get himself in certain predicaments. It just shows what kind of person he was. I was doing my daily activities at work, waiting for customers to show up. Whenever someone did show up, the noise of a bell would go off, letting us know that a customer had entered the store. While waiting, someone had entered the store, and I heard the bell go off. I saw it was the guy, and he was holding a liquor bottle, drinking it and talking to his friend who was also my coworker. All of a sudden, he started walking into the employees-only area, and he grabbed a knife and began to look at me, and he just started to talk trash. I pinned his arms against the wall then, and I pried the knife from his grasp, telling him to get out, as only employees were allowed back here. I told him he'd better stay out. He started to say that he was just kidding, that he wasn't going to hurt anyone. I told him I didn't care, that I needed him gone. He said he would go, but he would be back, and that I'd better watch myself, whatever that meant. He left, and I was just waiting for more customers. Only a couple came in and quickly left. I was cleaning at the time, being cautious, as I wondered if that man was going to keep his promise about coming back. An hour passed by and 2 of my coworkers went home. By then it was just me and 2 other workers, sitting and talking, on a particularly slow day. The bell went off again. I thought it was a customer wanting to place an order, but to my surprise, it was that man again, the one who had threatened me subtly earlier. He was holding a now empty liquor bottle, and I asked him what he was doing back here. Drunkenly, he told me he wanted to kill me, and that I should come towards him. I looked him up and down, rolled my eyes and said that he needed to leave immediately. He kept telling me to come over to him, or to meet him outside. One of my coworkers, the one that was his friend, started to talk him down, trying to de-escalate the situation. I went over there so I could try to convince him to leave too, but by the time I stepped by his side, he was trying to raise the empty bottle to hit me with it. As he was drunk, I was able to act a lot faster than him. I blocked the bottle and hit him in the face. His glasses broke, falling to the floor, as did the liquor bottle. We struggled for a bit, and I continuously held the advantage. Fighting a drunken man isn't really a hard task. Eventually, he pulled away from me, and he quickly climbed over the employee's side. When I saw him again, he was holding a knife once more. He sprinted towards me, very clearly trying to stab me. I evaded him and ran around the salad bar, putting some distance between us. I ran to the back door and dialed 911 while I did. The operator answered and I told him the current situation. They said the police were on their way, and luckily, since we were a small town, they arrived pretty quick. Once the guy saw the cops, he dropped the knife and ran. The police officers chased him down, and another stayed at the restaurant, collecting evidence and asking plenty of questions about the incident. Eventually, my manager came in, asking if I was doing okay. I confirmed to him that I was fine, though honestly I was shaken up. Whether or not I was winning a fight against a drunken man, well, having a knife ran at you is pretty scary. My heart was still racing as I tried to collect myself. I called my parents, who came by as well and were relieved to see me uninjured. The man was giving a restraining order, and he was not allowed to come back to our store ever again. Even doing so, this did not stop him from coming back the following week. He came back and saw me, and I stared right at him. He was clearly drunk last time I'd seen him, but during the moment he came back, he seemed sober. He came in, almost mockingly. I told him that he wasn't allowed to be in here. He simply asked for a cup of water, and he took off in a hurry after I gave him one. But in that moment, my adrenaline was through the roof, and I really thought he had come back for revenge. I was very aware of everything, very vigilant and cautious after the first incident. He really never disturbed the town again. He seemed to stick to himself more often. I'm not sure if he was arrested or not, but it seemed he knew to stay out of trouble from now on. I don't know his current whereabouts, or how he's doing, but I personally hope to never run into him again, because I just don't know his intentions. If we were to make contact, I don't know what would happen. Thanks for tuning in to Tales from the Break Room, the home of the scariest true work stories. If you want to hear your story narrated by me, send it to me at eeriecast.com/submit. We pay 5 cents per word for accepted stories. Help us grow by leaving Tales from the Break Room a rating and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. Check out eeriecast.com or search for EerieCast on those very same podcast apps to see our other exciting and terrifying podcasts, like Unexplained Encounters, the other show I host, where I read stories with a focus on the supernatural. To get some merch, go to eeriecast.store. And to unlock ad-free episodes of your favorite EerieCast shows and exclusive audiobooks, go to eeriecast.com/plus and consider signing up for EerieCast Plus. You can follow me on Twitter, I guess it's X now, @Prevails. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube, where I deliver the same content. Just look for Darkness Prevails. Good night. I hope we can share another break sometime soon.